get her bars between hearts. The first time Officer Maya Reyes pressed her palm flat against the cold steel door of cell block D and closed her eyes, she was not thinking about procedure or protocol. She was thinking about the way inmate Seren Calloway had looked at her that morning through the narrow slot of the food tray window, not with the hollow, practiced indifference that most inmates wore like armor, but with eyes so full of quiet sorrow and buried warmth that Maya had stood, frozen in the corridor for a full 30 seconds after the window slid shut, her hand pressed to her own chest as if checking whether her heart was still beating the same way it always had. It was not. Seren Calloway had been in Hartwell, women's correctional facility, for 2 years when Maya arrived as a newly transferred officer, fresh from a precinct. Upstate where everything had been. Noise and speed and the grinding bureaucracy of a city that never stopped moving. Hartwell was different. It was slow in the way that grief is slow, not empty, but heavy. Every hallway, weighted with the accumulated stories of women who had made choices or been caught in circumstances that landed them behind walls that smelled of bleach and old paint. Seren was serving a 5-year sentence for a white-collar fraud conviction that had unraveled her entire life, her career, her apartment, the long-term relationship she had believed was solid ground. She had arrived at Hartwell already gutted, already a version of herself she barely recognized, and she had spent 2 years building a careful silence around herself like a second set of walls. She read. She helped other inmates with letters and legal documents when they asked. She did not cause trouble. She did not ask for anything. She had learned in the most painful way possible that wanting things only created new ways to lose them. Maya noticed her the way you notice something out of a place in a landscape you are just beginning to learn. Most inmates moved through the common areas with a kind of defensive choreography, bodies angled away, eyes scanning, voices calibrated to carry only as far as necessary. Seren moved through the same spaces like someone walking through a museum after hours, quietly observing a world she was part of but not fully inside. She carried a worn paperback everywhere, and on Maya's 3rd week at Hartwell, she caught Maya staring at the cover during afternoon yard time and held it up without a word. It was a novel Maya had loved in college, one she had not thought about in years. Something passed between them in that moment that neither of them had names for yet, and both of them were careful in the days that followed to pretend it had not happened. But the thing about an emotional connection that arrives uninvited is that pretending does not make it smaller. It makes it larger. It fills the space between two people like water filling a room. Slowly, then all at once. Maya began to notice the specific rhythm of Seren's footsteps in the corridor. Seren began to glance up from her book precisely when Maya entered the common room, as if some quiet frequency in her body knew the sound of her approach. They did not speak beyond what was required by the structure of their roles. Maya distributed materials, conducted counts, monitored movements. Seren complied with every instruction, kept every boundary, never pushed against the architecture of the place that held her. But in the margins of their necessary interactions, something was being written that neither of them had agreed to write and neither of them could stop. The night that changed everything was not dramatic in its setting. It was a Tuesday in November. The heating system running 2 hours late. The cell block cold and quiet in the way that institutional buildings get quiet when the official business of the day is done and only the real human sounds remain. Someone crying softly 2 cells down, someone else murmuring prayers in a language Maya did not speak. Seren had been given extended library access for completing a GED tutoring program she had run for 3 months, and Maya was the officer, on duty when Seren sat down at one of the library tables and pressed her face into her hands and began to cry in a way that was clearly not new. It was the crying of someone who had been holding something enormous for a very long time and had simply run out of places to put it. Maya walked over. She sat down across from her, which was not protocol, and said nothing, which was also not protocol, and simply stayed, which was the only thing that felt honest. Seren looked up eventually, eyes red and raw, and what she said was not a declaration or a confession. It was just the truth, plain and exhausted, that she was so tired of being invisible, that she had been invisible for so long that she had started to feel like she might simply disappear, and that the only time in the past 2 years she had felt like a real person was when Maya looked at her. Maya did not move away from that truth. She sat with it. She told Seren quietly, carefully, that she saw her, that she had always seen her, that seeing her had become something she could not stop doing even when she tried. They did not touch. They sat in the cold library with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and they looked at each other with the full weight of everything. They were not allowed to be, and it was the most intimate thing Maya had experienced in her entire life. What followed was not a fairy tale. It was not easy or clean or free of consequence. Maya was consumed by the ethical gravity of her position, the power differential, the responsibility she carried, the rules that existed for reasons that were real and important. She spoke to a counselor outside the facility. She lost sleep. She asked herself hard questions and sat with uncomfortable answers. She knew that any relationship born inside those walls, while Seren was still incarcerated, while Maya still held authority over her daily life, could not be what either of them deserved. She knew that love, real love, the kind that respects the full
humanity of the other person, and sometimes
means stepping back from what you feel in order to protect what you believe. And so she requested a transfer, not because what she felt wasn't real, but because it was. She wrote Seren a letter before she left, which she cleared through proper channels, formal and careful in its language but honest in its core, that she had enormous respect for her, that she believed in her future, that some connections were real even when their timing was wrong, and that she hoped Seren would carry her own worth with her when she walked out of Hartwell, which she would because she had earned it every single day. Seren read that letter 4 times. She folded it and kept it in the back of her paperback novel. She did not cry. She sat with her spine straight and her chin level, and she felt, for the first time in years, like someone worth writing a letter to. Seren was released 14 months later, 3 months early for good behavior and program completion. She stood outside the gates of Hartwell on a gray March morning with a duffel bag and a folder of documents and the specific, terrifying freedom of someone who has been given back their life and is not yet sure what to do with it. She had a number. She had almost deleted it a dozen times, and had never once called it, because she had believed in the same thing Maya had believed in, that some things have to wait for the ground to be right before they can grow. She stood on the pavement outside the prison and she dialed. Maya answered on the second ring. There was a long silence, and then Maya said her name, just her name, one word, and the way she said it carried everything that had been held in waiting, all the cold library nights and the fluorescent buzz and the careful, costly distance. And Seren stood on the pavement in the gray morning light and smiled for the first time in a long time, like someone who had not forgotten how. They took it slowly. They met for coffee in a small place 3 towns over, and they talked for 4 hours about books and families and the paths their lives had taken and the strange, specific courage it takes to remain a feeling person in a world that sometimes punishes feeling. They were not the same people they had been inside those walls. Seren was finding her footing in a world that had moved on without her, and Maya was carrying her own quiet wounds from years of working in systems that wore people down, but they were honest with each other in the way that people are honest when they have already seen each other in the hardest possible light and chosen to stay present anyway. They were gentle with each other in the way that people are gentle when they know what it costs to be broken and what it means to be witnessed. What grew between them was not a story about prison or rules or the dramatic collision of 2 worlds. It was a story about 2 women who recognized something essential in each other across every barrier that had been placed between them, and who loved that essential thing enough to wait for the moment when they could meet it fully, without walls, without roles, without the weight of a system defining the edges of what they were allowed to feel. It was a story about how human connection does not ask for convenient circumstances before it arrives, and about how sometimes the most profound love is the love that is patient enough to wait until it can be free. If you have ever loved someone quietly across an impossible distance, or felt seen by another person in a moment when you had almost given up on being visible, you already know what this story is about. It lives in a place inside you that has nothing to do with walls or rules or the categories the world places around who we are allowed to love. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you that human warmth survives in the most unlikely places, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not invisible. Your small action carries more weight than you know. Before we close, drop a word in the comments below that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. Let us see how many different ways one story can land in the hearts of the people who hear it. Maya and Seren still take walks on Sunday mornings in a park near the apartment they eventually shared. And sometimes one of them will pick up a book from a secondhand shop and hold it up without a word, the way Seren once held up a paperback through the noise and distance of a prison yard. And the other will look at it and smile. And in that small gesture lives everything they crossed to find each other. Every hard night, every careful choice, every moment they chose the harder, realer thing over the easier, lesser one. Some love stories do not begin with perfect circumstances. Some begin in the hardest places and become beautiful precisely because of what they survived to reach the light.